This is the Brain Software Podcast, emanating from the Hypnotic World Epicenter, Toronto, Canada. I'm Chris Thompson, with less of a voice today. And today, NLP and hypnosis trainer Mike Mandel and I are going to discuss Milton Erickson and why we believe he was the GOAT. So stay tuned.
Disclaimer. This week, I received 2 emails from people pleading with us to stop saying Loochie. But here's my question to them. Can you really stop us? Can you stop us at all?
Loochie.
Hey, Pouch. What's going down, Breach Clout? Just dropping in to listen to the podcast, Scro. Now that I'm a black stillionaire, I recommend you go to Belmont. Put every buck you can raise on Lord Melbury's horse in race number 6. You'll thank me, bag. But anyway, since I'm here, might as well give you the line you're all waiting for. Whatever happened to Lady Melbury, and how come we don't hear about her anymore?
Bite me crank, matey! But before you do, let's welcome the world's foremost pluviophile and ailerophile, who's the hypnotic vampire hunter and the Keith Richards of hypnosis, Mike Mandel.
Yes, Christopher, we are back, and I'm going to hit you with another Loochie, just because I
Loochie.
can. All right, we got a good one today, man.
So,
what's the usual
ailerophile,
banter and
pluviophile.
promotions?
Well, first of all, we're going to have a great I want to lead with some content up front.
Oh,
We're gonna
yeah.
do some high quality discussion. Is it okay to say that?
Are we going to raise the bar? Like,
It's
what's
not
going
an
on?
illegal thing. As my daughter used to say, why are you doing that? Because it's not illegal. It's perfectly legal to have high
Brilliant.
quality discussion about Milton H. Erickson and how freaking awesome he was.
Yes.
So we're going to do that. We have our upcoming May hypnosis class totally sold out.
Yeah.
On the waiting list. Keep saying, no, it's full. And I'm really sorry. November class still has space, but it's starting to fill up too. So I recommend if you're interested, MikeMandelHypnosis.com. Thank you. Let me get through the URL. It's awesome. And we've got our July cohort for the Foundations Live program, which you'll also find on the events page of our website. But more on that later, because it's time to move to the 3 think tank words.
These think tank words were actually drawn from Sava Bukacek's think tank in my office, completely random, and we're going to expound upon them, and then we're going to connect them to Dracula.
Were they really random? Really?
Yes, they were. So let's begin, Chris. I will read them. You will deconstruct them initially. We're going to tie these to the power of the massive unconscious mind that we jointly possess to make sense out of this and bring a strength and a glenation in the midst of all of this death.
Okay.
So here we go.
We'll do it briefly.
It's been a scary, scary few days, but we start with reprehend.
Reprehend. Okay, let's do all 3 of them and then we'll just
Balmy.
balmy.
Not balmy.
balmy
Balmy.
weather.
You don't pronounce
Yeah,
the
I
L.
know.
Okay.
I just did.
Fugacity. That's one you got to know.
Nope.
Come off it.
Fugacity. Fugacity.
How come I knew that one and you didn't?
Well, because you know a lot of words that I don't.
No, but you're the science geek.
Yeah. Okay. What does it mean?
Well, we'll get there.
All right.
What is reprehend? Surely you know that one.
Reprehend. Well, I've never heard. I can't think of a time using the word that way. I've heard reprehensible. You know.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right. So of course reprehend, which would be the verb, I
Okay.
suppose. Yeah. What's the actual definition?
Well, let's figure this. The good thing is, if we don't know, we never admit it, and we make it up so well that you'll think we know.
Okay.
So reprehend, Chris, is to apprehend under represis. So we're putting a resistance to someone saying something that is in fact reprehensible.
Okay, got you. So you're comprehending, learning, apprehending.
Right. And then
With
reprehending,
like,
sort of recycling.
okay.
Like when you recycle something.
All right,
So what
so-
about balmy?
So reprehend. So recycle, we can think, how does that fit into hypnosis
Well, it doesn't
in the context? Recycle, i.e., when you learn awesome stuff, let's recycle it and use it over and over again. Milton Erickson.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Balmy.
Balmy. Well, I think of nice and warm and tropical.
That's what I think too, like a calm sort of day, a nice balmy breeze. But back in Britain in the Victorian era, balmy was actually used as a term for stupid.
Really?
Have you gone
There you go.
balmy?
Okay, so
Yeah.
if you don't take the work of Milton Erickson seriously,
Right.
you might be balmy.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Okay. Fugacity.
If you don't know what it means.
It's a term from physics. It's actually all tied to Boyle's law and the pressure of gases. In fact, fugacity is how much a gas wishes to escape from confinement. It's a measure of fugacity.
That's interesting. I never heard that term.
But you can think of it, though. I'm sure you can get an application there. Okay.
So you could think of something like pressure and temperature that would create this fugacity, the need to reach equilibrium and homeostasis. All right.
Correct.
Cool.
So fugacity to Dracula.
Gases, radon, death,
Transylvania.
vampires, Dracula.
That'll work. Okay, let's get our talking points. So we're flying through this because we just have other stuff we want to do. But we're showing up. Why? Because we care
can.
so freaking much about you guys in a way. So let's discuss Milton Erickson. What made Milton great? Now, I'm at Foundation at baseline. We'll edit that out. But I'm basically primarily an Ericksonian. So when Igor Ledochowski interviewed me for 5 freaking hours, literally, he said, well,
Not all in one day.
not in one day, 2 days. He said, I'm sure you're an Elmanian at heart. And I said, no. I said, I'm actually foundationally an Ericksonian more than anything. And I've built everything else spectacularly well on top of that, as you can imagine. But Erickson, one of the things he did that I think was brilliant right off the top was his use of utilization.
Yeah.
So he didn't use scripts. He didn't go in with a plan. He would let the therapy become tailored to the constraints of the patient, his patient, because he was a doctor, and what they were offering him. Utilization is something that every hypnotist needs to be skilled at.
Now, that's a worthy point to expand on a little bit, because normally when we talk about utilization and incorporation in the context of generating hypnotic language, we reference utilization as something like, you noted, you calibrate.
Yeah.
The breathing rate has changed. And as that breathing rate shifts, it's a simple thing to become aware of, and then we lead somewhere else, right? So we would utilize what the client's already doing. If the eyelids flutter, and that eyelid fluttering is a great indication of
This is, you're right.
that's only language. But then we have an entire other area. For example, in the Collected Papers, Volume 1, which I'm currently reading, one of the papers has all these different case studies around utilization, like Ma, who was in her 70s, she was brilliant, but she'd never learned to read or write.
Yes,
And
when she
so
was
he
drawing the letters.
utilized from her history, knowing things like, and you can use nail to mark a line on the board where you're going to cut it, because she knew how to use a saw and things like that from farm work. And so he would essentially utilize what she already knew to show her that she had the skills to build letters. She didn't write letters. He reframed it as building letters.
Yes,
and
that fits perfectly.
Words.
Constructing.
And not reading, but naming words. You're just naming them.
Yeah.
That's easy.
I get a word you can freaking
anyway,
name.
so that was the other area of utilization that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but it's genius.
No, but that's good. I mean, Peckers of Hell, that was as good a utilization as I've ever heard.
think it really does tie into the concept of reframing, which I don't even know if it's on your list here. It's probably
It is,
not.
I think.
So,
now,
okay.
he was the classic reframer. And let's look at, he used auto-hypnosis, self-hypnosis on himself, which self-hypnosis, your Department of Redundancy department. We're back to that. But the bottom line was Erickson was stricken with polio twice. And when he was very young, it almost killed him. And he was paralyzed with polio. And he used self-hypnosis and he tuned his senses to hear people more accurately and got his motion back. He got his ability to move back. His mobility is the word I'm looking for. And motility as well, incrementally. So he used auto-hypnosis, self-hypnosis, and it enabled him to understand profoundly the trance states when he became a psychiatrist later.
Yeah. And really, I mean, this goes back to a discussion we had, not in a podcast, but in a video where Tim Ferriss had interviewed Dr. David Spiegle.
Right.
We think it's awesome, except that we disagree with his view that people can't become more skilled hypnotic subjects. And we just completely disagree and think that, well, first of all, self-hypnosis, you're going to get better by doing it. And as a hypnotic subject in somebody else hypnotizing you, you're going to be better by doing it. And Erickson proved that time and time again. That lines up with our experience. So it doesn't make sense to us to say, oh, hypnosis is stable, and 25 years later, when you retest the same person, they're just as as hypnotizable or unhypnotizable as they were. It's like asking the couch potato, oh, can you do push-ups
to bite potatoes,
Well, no, if they didn't spend 25 years practicing fitness or whatever the case may be, they're not going to be any better at it.
Right, so, and it's one thing I would like to draw your attention to, Watson, the fact that is point number 2, and we're already a third of the way through the podcast.
Are you serious?
Yes, Chris.
All right.
So let us continue, and...
I thought you meant that was point number 2.
No, we've only got to point number 2.
Why don't you just lead?
Thank you. I was rather well too. Indirect techniques, ordeal, symptom prescription. He didn't do just direct suggestion. He would get people to take on the behavior that was problematic and make it worse as a means of them getting
Microphone's over
control of it. Yeah, yours is here. Here we are. So all of that, the symptom prescription where somebody had insomnia, he'd make them stay up and clean their floor with, arrow wax, all of this, and got amazing results. Now, he didn't do this in the beginning. This must have developed over the years, and he hypnotized a hell of a lot of people. Can we say a lot? Can we say those words?
I think, yeah, you can.
Now,
You can't say that. You can't say a lot.
What about his use of metaphor? I'm going to let you open that point.
Well, before we do, I just want to say that I know, but there's something special about Erickson and the prestige and the authority that he had, because you can't go to a typical hypnotherapist.
Yeah.
And when you say, "Oh, I have insomnia," and when you wake up, you're gonna wax the floor all night long.
I wonder what you're going to say for a minute then.
Yeah, but the idea of assigning someone the ordeal, that's
You say ardeal?
Ordeal.
Okay.
Ordeal.
But listen to tape later. He said ardeal.
You would say, it would be a bit
the tape.
It would be a bit unconventional to do that. It's always unconventional when Erickson did it, but he could get away with it.
He got away with it because he was Milton effing Erickson.
Yeah,
right.
so
and he got away with a lot of that stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, may not be able to utilize it.
Okay.
There you go.
So we've just unpacked the third point. Let's go on to metaphor, where we're trying to get.
All right. Well, metaphors one of the. Let me tell you a story about metaphors.
Shut up.
Metaphors one of
Metaphors
these
be with you.
wonderful things that make Erickson unique. His entire originality comes from the fact that you can do this stuff in ordinary conversation. You couldn't do Ellman's work or any of the really direct swinging a watch and stare into my eyes or look at that spot.
Right.
It'd sound too weird if you were working that into an ordinary conversation. So I love the fact that metaphor is a simple tool. People are not going to go, "Oh, he's trying to hypnotize me."
Yeah, of course.
No, you're just telling a story.
It's the subtlety. Yeah.
It draws people in to the message, and they're not they're not being told to imagine that they're in the story, but they passively imagine it in some way.
Brilliant.
They focus their attention on it, and then the message, the unconscious learning, slips through, and often people change.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Now, this isn't a feature that is unique to hypnosis. It's just a hypnotic tool. It's
Correct.
used in business. It's used in sales and marketing. It's used in entertainment. And it's used in therapeutic change.
Anything else?
Nope.
Good, thank you. He said that he moved away from the hyper-directive hypnosis that he did initially, because when he was with Clark Hull, University of Wisconsin, and all of this stuff when he was training in the beginning, got working with Hull, Erickson said by his own admission he was far too directive in the beginning phases. He developed this stuff over time, and he moved away from hyper-directive hypnosis and began exploring the more subtle approaches, which is crucial because he turned hypnosis into, these are the notes, strategic learning and problem solving. He would point out the client's skill sets, whether or not they were in trance at the time, and map them across, taking their skills into the problem. So say they had amazing ability at work to organize people. He'd be in his mode of, that great organization you got when you're in that lumber yard can organize the cells of your body to make your blood flow cleaner, whatever the heck
And
to say, right? That was a pretty good one.
The idea of using that as a reframe. I mean, I remember hearing your story about the young man who could never master anything.
Oh, yeah.
He was just a jack of all trades. And
yeah.
what did you tell him?
I said, you're right. You are a loser. You've mastered nothing whatsoever. And he just shook his head. He said, you're right. And I said, the only thing you've mastered is being a jack of all trades. And to see the integration hit, his face flushed. He said, thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. If we have time, I'll tell you a story about a reframe that's not
we're certainly not going to
involving utilization. So we'll probably save it for another podcast.
Yeah.
Or
All right.
just ignore it
Here's a
altogether.
couple of other things. Erickson was an early promoter of family therapy, which Virginia Satir became known for, especially to people with NLP background. But what he did was he had that intuitive ability to see within a family where the problem person was, or not problem person so much as the person who needed resources, needed to change. That would then ripple and the entire family would become adjusted.
Yeah,
And brief therapy, this stuff really comes out. Brief therapy, where he did not necessarily do everything over a period of time. But we must remember, brief therapy came into a boom in the mid to late 1970s when Bandler and Grinder had codified a lot of Erickson's work, and Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir's and so on. And Erickson, having come out of a psychoanalysis background, did a lot of very long therapies where people would come back repeatedly.
Hours and multiple sessions.
Right.
Yeah, long sessions and repetitive weekly things. But yeah, I think there is an 80-20 principle here where you can get people pretty darn far down the road towards a solution in a short period of time. So,
Yep. Well, our own Timothy September does that spectacularly well.
yeah, well, actually, yes, I was just telling you before we recorded, so I'll do the quick version of the story.
I'll
He was
stopwatch.
speaking with a woman who had a problem, in her view, of, how can I put this, not being able to put herself out there in business to grow. He did the intervention, his entered a loop, traditional style, and in about 5 minutes, I won't say what the problem was because it's a bit personal.
Yeah, so you're not gonna say her name.
It was a complete personal issue about a specific set of relationships in her life. That was the real issue that stopped her from putting herself out there. So what she was aware of was simply the symptom, not the cause at all.
Right.
And we find that is so often the case in hypnosis. And he just has this really elegant way of getting to it by asking the right questions.
Yes, and
looking
calibrating superbly. Yes,
and
yes.
That's the thing is you must calibrate. You must have a method of asking questions, but you must be calibrating so you know where to go next. And it's phenomenal to watch him work.
And obviously, that's correct. And obviously, I've already said that he powerfully interviewed. Let's rewind. We'll edit that out. Erickson powerfully influenced Mandel and Grinder. And that's how they created all these NLP interventions. A lot was from his direct expression to them. Now, realize John Grinder told me personally, I asked, why did you only spend 3 days at a time with Erickson? And he said, that's as long as they could stand being in his presence because they were going in and out of trance constantly. He had a real playfulness. And he was kind of funny in that regard. I mean, Erickson had a good sense of humor where somebody, I think it was Jeffrey Zeig, said when he first met him, Erickson greeted him warmly, shook his hand, and next thing Zeig knows is everybody's gone. And he's
just
standing in the
there
hallway,
looking at his
staring at his hand. It's fantastic.
I love it.
So-
speaking of NLP and Bandler and Grinder
Yeah.
modeling those three. So we've already mentioned Erickson, obviously. We've got Virginia Satir, which came up in this conversation.
Right.
And of course, Fritz Perls.
Right.
Which comes back to that hilarious Fritz and mistaking
Fritz
hearing
and
the
Jeff
word
show.
Chris for Fritz. Which
Yes,
was
Fritz.
hilarious. So hello, Victoria Gallagher. Just want to say hello to you.
Hello, I said
And
hello too.
The question I have for you, Mike, is
Uh-oh.
do you think I've always thought about, oh, well, they were modeled after these three. So being a math and science geek in my head, I'm thinking, oh, a third, a third, a third. I don't think it was a third, a third, a third. It seems to me there was a much more overwhelming emphasis on Erickson's work.
I have never considered this prior to this moment, but there's a fungible quality that I'm inclined to believe with you
Yeah. So something to think
and
about.
act alongside that.
Maybe
No,
we'll do an
that's
entire
right.
podcast on that.
And maybe we won't. Now,
We'll
look,
start a whole new podcast, not episode, podcast, just on that.
yeah, lunch and wine is beckoning. Now, look, Erickson saw the unconscious mind not as the seething pit of pain and hurts, but as a font of resources and skill sets. And that's how he utilized people's unconscious learnings and treated hypnosis as a learning state, as a profoundly powerful state for transformation, and utilized their resources. He was really the king of client-centered work. So as soon as somebody holds up some dickish script, like Jack the Dickish script reader, and reads this dickish script at some person and looks like a dick, Erickson was the furthest thing from that, and that needs to be kept in mind.
I love it.
I'm going to be 71 in 9 days. I'm allowed to say stuff like this. Go ahead.
Where are we going next?
Right here. What they talk about his ability to do pain management.
He did it to himself, right? He would
course.
put himself, speaking back to your self-hypnosis, he was in quite a lot of chronic pain in his later years.
Right.
And I think, if I remember correctly, from, again, Collected Papers 1, he put himself into trance so he could really ratchet down that pain for hours at a time. And sometimes
Yes.
it would take him quite a while.
Well, Derek Balmer, my mentor, told me that Erickson had to do self-work for about an hour a day
That's
just
what I
to
was
keep things
just
under
thinking.
control.
It was like an hour. I remember it saying.
Remember the woman
Yeah.
who was dying, or she was very ill, and he told her to imagine there was a tiger under her bed growling,
Yeah.
and she said every time she thought of the tiger, there was no pain. Time distortion he used. What about the February Man? Why don't you talk about that?
Oh man, I read that book years ago, but it was, he was working with a woman and he visited her in trance as the February Man.
Yes. He created a
different-
personal history
yeah,
for her.
Exactly. Going back in time and recreating a history to solve the problem. You probably remember it in much better
Well,
detail than I do.
he appeared, she didn't have a very good childhood. And I like Bandler's line, it's never too late to have a happy childhood.
So he invented like a big brother or
Well, no, it was
father
this
figure kind of?
avuncular person, like an uncle would
Yeah.
appear. And he set up over multiple sessions, times in her past when he would take her like to the zoo or something and teach her about animals or take her through all these different situations and built a happy childhood that developed wisdom and a degree of completeness for her. I think that was just brilliant. The February
That
man,
is-
he'd appear every February in her life.
That's
Yeah.
wild. Metaphor, because we talked about that.
Yeah.
That's like taking a house and realizing it's on a crap foundation and somehow elevating it, building the structure, and then putting the house back down.
I like it. And you can imagine how hard it is for me to say that without some sort of qualification. Nice. You know what? Let's look at some Milton Erickson quotes here. And these are exact quotes. He said, each person is a unique individual. Hence, psychotherapy should be formulated to meet the uniqueness of the individual's needs rather than tailoring the person to fit the Procrustean bed of a hypothetical theory of human behavior, which is freaking brilliant. And of course, I understood completely what he meant. Do you know what he means by the Procrustean bed?
No.
Well, let me enlighten you as a classically trained, self-learned scholar who can say words like Vuti. Here's the interesting thing. Greek mythology, Procrustes was a king, this evil king, and he had a bed made of iron. And when he captured one of his enemies, he would lay them on this bed. If they were longer than the bed, he'd cut them to size. If they were shorter than the bed, he would stretch them to make them fit it. So again, the implication is you're making the person
you're forcing
fit
it into a
your
mold.
model of the world. And
Yeah.
this is where so much hypnosis, so much therapy falls dead, is when people attempt to impose their model of the world on the client, because Erickson was the king of honoring their model of the world, their worldview.
So if you were to accept this quote, which we recommend you do,
Yeah.
it would make it rather difficult to test someone's hypnotizability using a standard depth scale and a script that you read.
I see
at
where you're
them.
going with this.
Yeah,
You're
there you
back
go.
on that point. You're back on that point.
That's an
Now,
important point.
Erickson often said, "My voice will go with you," and I've used that many times. I do it when I created art
It's like a
gallery.
safety anchor.
It is a safety anchor. You're saying that wherever you go, whatever you experience, my voice will go with you. And he would go on and say, "My voice will become the voice of your playmates, of your parents, your teachers, and the rain." I thought that
And
is
the
so
rain. Ooh.
freaking evocative. You know, I think I had a stroke, indicating the influence on the patient's internalization of therapeutic dialogues. Now, he said, look at this Erickson quote, or listen to it, probably be easier. Patients are patients because they are out of rapport with their own unconscious mind. Patients are people who have had too much programming, so much outside programming, they've lost touch with their inner selves. He reconnected people with their own inner self.
Yeah, I think that's important. And
That's right.
Why, with hypnosis being a learning state and self-hypnosis being an awesome thing, have you ever thought about the fact that the learning that happens in self-hypnosis is often mostly unconscious and only becomes conscious later?
I think so.
I become consciously aware of bits, but only later does it feel like the profound overall pieces are put in place, and my conscious mind is now aware, going, wow.
Oh, that was, yeah. I was talking to a woman the other day who had a profound experience doing some ego state work with hypnosis. And it was later, a year later, she revisited her notes and was shocked at what her unconscious mind had done. And notice that as I'm saying this, I'm steepling. I looked at myself in the monitor to make sure it's nice and straight. And this is adding authority to what I'm saying. And it's also indirectly supporting what he just said.
Bingo,
That's
I
the
like
kind
it.
of friend
Thank
I
you,
am.
Mike.
I'm
Thank
there for
you.
my friends.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at this. What made Erickson great? Let's go through these points quickly. Unparalleled creativity. Symptoms, behavior, voices in people's heads, even the physical environment became therapeutic tools. He used everything that was going on to move people inexorably towards the sort of change work that he was creating in a way that operated below the surface of their conscious awareness and depthified the transitions, Loochie. So what about depth of understanding of psychology? Because he was a psychoanalyst and a
medical doctor and a
psychiatrist,
psychiatrist, yeah.
you have to be a medical doctor to be a psychiatrist. And he brought his own models of the world to a degree. He thought everybody should be married, everybody should be gainfully employed. He had a few things in mind and he would lead people towards that. But by and large, his understanding of psychology led him fit what he was doing to, again, steepling, adding more depth to this, adding more power to what I'm saying, because that's what he did, understanding the deep mind. Yes.
Thinking of bringing your own world views.
Careful.
This is where content-free therapy fits in, so that sometimes you want to make sure you don't know too many details, so you don't bring in, as the therapist, your personal views.
Okay. Now that's a good point.
Would you say that Erickson was one of the leading creators of content-free therapy, or did that more come out of NLP? That's actually something I don't know.
I don't know either. But I'm going to cover it by saying, but I will know very, very soon. Well, let me think of it this way. So much of it is pure communication, right? He was a consummate communicator. I notice I'm speaking quicker to make sure we get everything in. My question to you, do you consider yourself to be a good communicator?
Well, at times, yes, but at other times, I think it's ego state dependent. It really is one of these things that if I'm in the right ego state, I'm amazing at communication.
I don't know what you mean.
You were just setting me up for that. Oh,
okay.
You fast.
Now look,
Okay.
He accepted the client's worldview. We know that. He focused, listen to this one. This is profound. If most hypnotists watching this took this into account in their own practice, it would help immeasurably. And so many people don't even think about it. He focused on the client or patient in his case, their ability, not their disability. What could the subject actually do and use their abilities to expedite change?
Nice.
Thanks.
I like that.
He was the master of the reframe. Now, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So many awesome reframes, both context reframes and
Content-free.
reframes, which we won't have time to get into right now. But reframing is a very powerful way for people to see something in a new light or see something in a new way. And then their belief about their old problem tends to collapse pretty quickly.
Nicely put.
Yeah.
That's nicely put. And he also used embedded commands. He used analog marking. I don't think anybody had intentionally developed it beforehand.
This stuff really becomes the most popular areas of what people consider conversational hypnosis, which is why I think it's so important for not just all hypnotists, but all humans to learn these skills, because most of the time you're not hypnotizing someone formally. You're having conversations with other people in your life. And if you can help influence them more effectively towards what will be beneficial to them because you're better at language.
Brilliant.
And you're not telling them to stare at this watch, like I mentioned earlier.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Learn it.
Excellent. Good point. He also, I've thrown this in as a side thing, side point. Erickson was known for the handshake interrupt rapid induction, where you're interrupting a tote and providing information when the brain scrambles and they have a massive Zeigarnik effect.
But
and
did he create
He did not create it, though. It was created by Ralph Slater in the 1940s, who was a stage hypnotist. Erickson almost certainly saw, because he studied hypnosis constantly, and he adapted it, though, and made it useful. I've actually adapted it from, I learned it from Derek Baum.
You're saying Wolf. I thought you were going to say Walter B. Gibson.
Why no? Ralph Slater, Wolf Slater. Wolf. Who named your frickin' kid Wolf?
Wolf
And
Slater.
for those of you listening whose names are Wolf, I
sorry.
apologize. I really do. And I won't say Loochie because of that.
Okay.
Now look, Erickson used the confusion technique to overload the conscious mind. So many of his inductions, so much of his hypnotic work utilized confusion. And I said, Derek, when I studied with him, there was a woman in the class who was so analytical. The way he got her into trance was a technique he got from Erickson. I think Derek studied, he went once down to Phoenix. He showed me the room he was in on one of the videos. And he wasn't in the video, but he was in that room. And he said, this came from Erickson. He got the woman to tilt her head back, stare at the ceiling, then close her eyes with her head so the horizon is taken away. And people rotated her, two people standing so she wouldn't fall. Yeah. As they did, she had to count backwards out loud from 400 by threes, seeing each number in a different color.
Yeah.
And it just became overload. And he said, and if at any time it's too much trouble, just drop into a trance. And she did, and the people caught her. Amazing. Confusion.
That's
overload.
That's like a direct method of confusion. You're giving somebody instructions that they know will overload their mind. You don't have to explain it. But then there's the use of clever language. Do you want to explain just really quick the example that you did when you started doing this on stage about sitting in this chair over there?
Oh, gosh. Well, yeah, that's when I would get somebody to go back to the audience. So I've sent a number of people back. And then one guy would be sitting there and I'd say, okay, and you can go back to the audience. And he'd start to stand up and I'd say, later on. And he'd sit down again. And I'd say, so you can sit there or sit in your seat in the audience. And he'd start to stand up. And I'd say, but when we end the show, you can go back now. And he back and forth, just get stuck in between the two and finally sleep now. That's right. Excellent. Well, you know what? This takes us to the epicenter of the moment of the cleansing point. We need to wrap this pecker up. So in a nice warm blanket of relaxation.
So that's very Almanian.
It is. Thank you. I want you to give us the empowering question.
Alrighty. So as I often do, I will read the empowering question,
Brilliant.
which is, Which of these points about Erickson are the most interesting to me, and what will I do today to learn more about his methods and then apply them to my own life?
Brilliant. You can vastly improve your hypnotic work. Anyone who studies Erickson and what he's done, because even if you do not apply the techniques, he can show you what is possible. Read the collected papers, all 4 volumes, or 10 volumes if you're Timothy September, although he made a
16
serious error.
volumes
Yeah.
of the collected works.
Well, I stole 6 of them.
Versus, oh, you did? Okay. Yeah, and before we end it, I'll just mention, visit our website, MikeMandelHypnosis.com. You can check out all the cool stuff we've got. You can sign up for the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy test drive for free. Don't even need a credit card to do it. It's that awesome.
Yeah.
That'll give you a really awesome we just relaunched it, by the way. I don't know if you're aware
I
that we hit the
know.
launch button.
You told me.
The Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy test drive is literally now, give me your name, email address so we can make your account. We put you into a curated experience of a series of awesome videos from all through the academy, not just like the first 2 lessons or something, but a whole curated experience with lead-in segments where I explain for 30 seconds why you're going to be watching these next 3 videos,
Nice.
what they'll do for you, and then it gives you a pressure-free try before you buy experience. It's freaking awesome. So go to MikeMandelHypnosis.com and we'll see you on the inside.
Thanks once again, and
good night!